Hello, everyone. How are you? My name is Nick. I'm posting this broadcast all the way from Australia, close to Melbourne. If anyone knows where that is. Today we're broadcasting from the Duke Lemur Center in North Carolina with Megan. So I'll just bring you over to Megan right now. Hello, Megan. How are you?
Hello, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for hosting. I just wanted to give you all a quick view at who's going to be behind the camera talking with you while we see the lemurs. So I'll be back here, but I'll go ahead and flip the camera around so everyone can see the forest and the lemurs when they come out in just a moment. We have perfect timing. So I'll introduce you to the lemurs as they're coming out. So we've got their keeper kind of leading the charge. They did get breakfast already this morning, but we've got a family of 4 red-ruffed lemurs. Quite a treat because we have 2 youngins in this family. And once they kind of settle in a spot, I'll introduce you to who is who. So these are our red-ruffed lemurs. Red-ruffed lemurs are found in the northeastern tip of Madagascar in a peninsula called the Mashwala Peninsula. And they are adapted to rainforest climates, but they do just fine here in the deciduous forests of North Carolina. Deciduous is a really good vocab word. And of course, it means when the leaves fall off the trees when the seasons are changing, as opposed to the evergreen pine trees that we have in a lot of North America. And these red-ruffed lemurs are following Liz out into a secondary spot out here where they're actually going to get their breakfast in a smaller enclosure because they aren't always nice about sharing food with everyone else. And this is also really good practice for them too, because when we hit the winter here in North Carolina, pretty soon it's going to be too cold for them to be outside here in the woods. So having them practice coming into smaller areas and eating some of their favorite treats, like there's a big chunk of banana that somebody just put in their mouth there. That was Hubble, actually, who just put that in his mouth there. Then we know that they're going to come in reliably for us, and they're going to come into the nice warm winter enclosures that we have. So now that we've got lemurs on camera and they're kind of staying in the same spots, I will introduce you to who is who. So it looks like we have Dad Buzz right down here on the ground. And Dad was just joined by Kit, which is daughter. And then up here we have Mom. That's Ruby there. And then we have son, Hubble, right over there. So this group is really fun to tell them apart because the way I tell them apart is this little halo right around her tail right there. Both girls have a little halo around their tail. So we call them halo butts as a cute nickname. So Ruby and her daughter both have that. And it's an easy way for us to tell them apart. And of course, Kit and Hubble are both miniature right now because they are less than 6 months old at this point. They're about 5 months old right now, and so they are much smaller than Mom and Dad. Once they get bigger, it might be a little harder for me to tell who is who. But let's back up even further and talk about why the heck we have lemurs in the woods in North Carolina at all. So the Duke Lemur Center is home to over 200 lemurs who live here in North Carolina, representing 12 different species. That is the most species of lemur you're going to find anywhere in the world outside of their native Madagascar. And the reason we have lemurs here is that we have a couple different programs with them. One, we do conservation breeding. So Mom and Dad were picked specifically here at the Lemur Center. Buzz and Ruby were picked because they have a great genetic match. They're going to have healthy babies. And we knew that Kit and Hubble would be really important babies to have these lemurs long-term in the Lemur Center and in other AZA facilities, or AZA, for those of you joining us from Canada. And also, we do have a research program here. Our research is all non-invasive, meaning that we don't ever do anything that's going to harm the lemurs, cause them any pain. We don't do anything more than what they would get during a routine vet exam. And a lot of our research is actually just watching the lemurs be lemurs, or doing kind of odd things like collecting lemur urine or lemur feces, because believe it or not, you can learn a whole lot about these animals from the things they would just leave behind on the forest floor. And then we also have a conservation program over in Madagascar. We've been working there for almost 40 years now with wild populations of lemurs, but mostly with the people living in Madagascar, the Malagasy people. And then we have our education program here. So we do on-site tours all summer long. We're actually coming to the very end of our tour season right now. And then next May, we will open back up again once the lemurs can all be in their summer warm weather housing and be nice and visible for our tours. So I think that's a pretty good introduction into what the Lemur Center is, what we do. We've got our red-ruffed lemur family here, and hopefully we'll see a pair of cockerel shafak a little bit later. That's another species of lemur that lives out here in the woods. But for now, I think we can enjoy these guys snacking away on giant chunks of carrot and lemur chow. You may have seen that they have carrots, bananas, I see green beans, and chunks of lemur chow. That's that big brown chunk right there. And that is just a specialized food, kind of like dog or cat food, that is specially formulated for the lemurs. We've even got 3 different types of lemur chow, because some lemurs eat more fruit, some lemurs eat more insects, some lemurs eat more vegetables, and some lemurs eat more leaves. So there's 108 recognized species of lemur. Even just the 12 species of lemur we have here are incredibly diverse, have really different diets, and have really different needs that we have to take care of. And these guys, as I mentioned, are only in this smaller space for their breakfast to keep them conditioned and trained to come in. If you can see, we've actually got doorways open to the forest right now. They can come and go as they please. They can go back out into the woods anytime they want to. They just want to be in here right now because that's where the tasty food is. So I know we have a lot of classrooms joining us today, so I think I'll stop there and see if we want to keep going with questions and get as many of those in as possible.
Sure. I can't see any questions on my end, Megan, so you're good to continue.
Okay. All right.
If you would like, yeah, sure.
That sounds great. Okay, so if you end up having questions soon, please just let us know. I want to give you as much time to interact as possible, but I can talk about lemurs for hours, so buckle in, folks. So I mentioned red-ruffed lemurs are from that Mashwala Peninsula up in northeastern Madagascar. So Madagascar is a huge island. Most people don't actually realize how big it is. It's the 4th largest island in the world. And for a reference for those of us in North America, it would stretch from about the bottom of Maine to the top of Florida and be about the width of California the whole way down. So most of the east coast of the United States would be covered by Madagascar. It's such a huge island. And that island has really humid, moist air coming in from the Indian Ocean on the east. And that moist air hits a high plateau region and forms the tropical rainforests all along the eastern coast of Madagascar. And that is where you'd find animals like these red-ruffed lemurs and their close cousins, the black and white ruffed lemurs. They're called ruffed because of this nice puff of fur right around their face right here. That puff of fur is ruff, R-U-F-F, as in they are ruffed lemurs, not rough, R-O-U-G-H, like they are rough and tumble, although they can also be like that too. And then we have the high plateau region in the middle of Madagascar where you don't see many lemurs, maybe some small nocturnal species like mouse lemurs or dwarf lemurs if you find patches of forest in that plateau. And then over on the west coast, you have a lot of deciduous forest in the northwest. That's where you find animals like the cockerel shafak or the mongoose lemurs. And then down in the southwestern coast, especially very far south, you will find the spiny forest, spiny desert, spiny shrub. Any way you call it, it has spiny in the name. It's not the most pleasant place to live. Very arid, kind of desert-like climate. Very, very different to where these ruffed lemurs would be found. And that is where you would find the ring-tailed lemur, which I like to call the poster child. That's the lemur that everyone's heard of, the lemur that everyone knows really well. And so if you're a lemur, you've got lots of different options for which habitat to live in. And lemurs are a fantastic example of adaptive radiation, where just a few founding events of some early lemurs made it to the island of Madagascar. And then over millions of years, their ancestors who had arrived from a natural rafting event, meaning that a big cyclone came through the coast of Africa, ripped off a bunch of vegetation, and there were probably some lemurs stuck on that vegetation, and they got carried over on a natural raft over to Madagascar. Once those animals got there, there were no higher primates to compete with, no monkeys, no apes, no humans, and actually no carnivores for millions and millions of years, which is how they were able to radiate and adapt all across the island and become so many different diverse species of lemur. No, we're a little backlit, so I'm trying to find the best way to show you. There we go. There's a better view of everybody. All right, and let me do a quick ID again so we can tell who is who. So we currently have Kit right here. Nope, I misidentified already. That's Hubble. Ooh, these twins are going to kill me with these IDs. And then right here, I think we have Buzz eating. So that's Dad eating with son right here. So they look very, very alike, as you can tell. Only way I can tell them apart is that Dad is a bit bigger than his son here, but honestly, not that much bigger. Lemurs grow very, very quickly. Lemurs usually only have one baby at a time, but in ruffed lemurs, they are pretty unusual. They're going to have twins or triplets very commonly here in the Lemur Center and in other zoos across the North America and the world. But in the wild, they can actually have up to 6 infants at a time. And they are physically adapted differently than other lemurs who only have one baby or maybe 2 babies at a time. So ruffed lemurs are pretty unusual because they'll build a nest for their young instead of actually having them cling to mom and dad, or usually just to mom while they're moving through the forest. These babies are actually going to have a nest where they hide while mom and dad go off and forage. So if they decide to do their alarm call this morning, I will possibly have to mute because it'll be very, very loud. They can be heard a half a mile away, but they seem pretty calm and chill this morning. So hopefully nothing startles them and we don't have to deal with that very, very loud call they'll do. But they're so loud because they have babies hiding in a nest back home. And so they want to make sure the babies know if they see any danger nearby. All right, so I'm going to pause again and see if we have any questions coming through.
Sure, yes, we absolutely do. And we'll bring on Mr. Burns' class first, if anyone has any questions.
Mr. Burns? Oh, there we are.
Hi. Does anyone have a question that they want to either ask, or you can hand me the paper and tell me the question?
I have why are they different colors?
Why are they different colors? That's the question we have.
So I think my internet may not be doing very well. Could I hear that question one more time?
Oh, why are they different colors?
Yes, great. So there could be a couple of different reasons depending on the lemur. Of course, we're talking about 108 species of lemur, so there might be different reasons for each of those species. With the red-ruffed lemurs being differently colored than the black and white ruffed lemurs, we don't know if there's a specific reason, if there's a specific advantage to being this color in their forest versus being black and white in the very similar rainforest a little further south on the East Coast where you find black and white ruffed lemurs. So this might be one of those cases where evolution doesn't always favor a trait that gives you an advantage. Sometimes evolution favors a trait that just doesn't cause any problems for you. So it may just be that red ruffed lemurs happen to get isolated in their zone and they happen to have more of that red color trait. And the black and white ruffed lemurs may have been isolated in their zone in Madagascar, their patches of forest in Madagascar. And it didn't really cause any problems for anyone, so they wound up different colors. For the most part, you're going to see lots of lemurs with colors that are going to help them blend into the forest. And so it seems like red would not be a very good color for blending into the forest. But let me see if I can get you a view of someone who's starting to venture out into the woods. You'd actually be pretty surprised by how well they blend in once they get into the woods, but I don't have a good view of that now. But that's my long-winded answer to your question. Sorry.
Okay, sure. And we'll just move on to Mr. Backus's class.
Yeah.
Put you on screen.
Are all the lemurs you have hurt or rescued?
That's a great question and one that's really, really important to talk about. The answer is no, our lemurs are not rescued, and there's a really, really important reason for that. One is that you wouldn't find most of the species we have here in need of rescue because they're so hard to find in the US to begin with. So you're not going to find animals like blue-eyed black lemurs or cockerel shafak outside of AZA facilities or the American Association, the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. There's also a Canadian version as well across North America. The other reason is that for us to do our conservation breeding program, we need an exact pedigree for all of these animals all the way back to the wild, a stud book actually, just like in horse breeding or in, fancy dog breeding. We want to know exactly where these animals came from, who their parents are. And so rescue is a completely different type of operation. There are some issues with lemurs being held as pets in the US, and I'm sure a little bit in Canada, though probably not as bad as in some states in the US. And in that case, there are rescues that specifically work with those lemurs, because as you might imagine, wild animals don't make very good pets, especially wild primates. As primates ourselves, we understand how hard it is to raise a baby human. That's about how hard it is times 10 if you're trying to raise a baby lemur, because they never develop language like we do, and they never grow up and move out. And so these guys, if they do end up as pets, do need rescuing, but that's not something that the Duke Lemur Center here can do while also doing our research and our conservation breeding. That's a whole nother operation.
That's a great question. And we'll just move on to Mrs. Tubner's class. Any questions?
Yep.
Can lemurs be house pets?
That is a great segue from our last question. And the answer is can, as in, is it physically possible in some places, like in the US, for it not to be illegal? Technically, yes. Should? Absolutely not. These animals are wild animals. And so when we think of house pets, we think of dogs and cats, maybe even chickens. And those animals are what we call domesticated, meaning that generations of those animals have spent time around people, and only the friendliest of those animals have then had babies and spent more time around people. So those animals are different. A wild cow is going to have different genetics and a different look from a domesticated cow. Same thing if we look at wolves and dogs. They're going to have completely different genetics from each other and be completely different animals. So lemurs are not domesticated at all. They are all wild. There is no domesticated version of a lemur. And so wild animals are going to do best in the wild. They're not going to be happy living with people. They're not going to be happy living in someone's house.
And finally, Mr. Ramey's class, if you have any questions.
Yeah, we have one.
How old do they usually get?
Great question. So with every single question like this, I have a slightly annoying first response, which is, it depends. So how old a lemur gets depends on a lot of things. So this lemur right in front of us, the redruffed lemur, is one of our longest lived lemurs we have here. I'm going to move so you can see a little better. This is the daughter, by the way, that we're looking at now. This is Kit. And so when we are looking at little Kit, we can expect her to live here at the Lemur Center into her early to mid 30s. Our oldest lemur we ever had on record here at the Lemur Center was a 37-year-old red-ruffed lemur. In the wild, that age might be closer to their 20s, maybe their late 20s or early 30s if they live in a really good protected area. But then you also have other types of lemurs, like the tiny mouse lemurs that are the size of a mouse. They're going to live a much shorter life because they're much tinier. And you've got lots of other factors like, does the lemur live in the wild, or do they live here? Do they live in a protected area or not? So I'll say just for this little lemur right here, we can expect her to live into maybe her early to mid 30s.
Cool. And Megan, we just got a couple of questions just on YouTube that I'll just put up on the screen just now.
Great question about how we keep them where they're supposed to be in the woods. So I will actually take a brief trip over to the fence line to show you. So pardon me, I'm going to move away from seeing lemurs for just a moment, so you can see the fence I'm talking about. Okay, so we've got our nice fancy research building behind as well, but you can just barely see a fence right over there. That fence has a little net across the top. So that net has a light electrical pulse that just feels like a bee sting, not enough to hurt the lemurs, but enough for them to think it's annoying and not want to touch it. So they don't touch that fence. And then we also keep the trees cut back at least 10 or 15 feet on either side of that fence. So lemurs can't climb up and over because they don't want to touch that annoying net. And they can't leap across over because they don't have trees to jump to. And that's how we keep the lemurs inside the forest. This forest is about 3-ish acres in size. We have bigger forests, we have smaller forests, but all of them have that same fence line all the way around. We also have what's called a dig barrier, where we have fence buried underneath the ground to keep animals like coyotes or bobcats from getting in and going after our lemurs, because of course nobody would want that.
And Joanna Emu, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, is asking how far can red-ruffed lemurs leap?
All right, so how far can red-ruffed lemurs leap? This is a great question, and I don't know if I know the exact response, like from the scientific research. I can just tell you what I've seen, which is when they're up in the treetops, they can make pretty good leaps. They can make leaps, I'd say, of 8 feet or so if they have some room to kind of fall as they leap, kind of drop in the canopy layer. But ruffed lemurs tend to be more likely to move between branches that are closer together. They're from an area in Madagascar with dense canopy, dense rainforest cover. And so they're kind of fun to watch move through the forest because they kind of just fly through the treetops without having much of a thought of where they're going next, because in their mind, there's always going to be another branch. There's always going to be another thing to grab. So they're much more likely to kind of basically run along the canopy layer, moving from close branch to close branch. And they're not typically going to make gigantic leaps between trees.
And I'll just take one more from YouTube, and then we'll do just another loop. So Sonia is asking, what is the difference between red lemurs and other lemurs?
Oh man, there are so many differences between red-ruffed lemurs and other lemurs. There are lots of other lemurs with red in their name. There's the red-collared lemur, the red-fronted lemur, the red-bellied lemur. So again, there are 108 different species of lemur, so they can be so different from one another. One of the big things that distinguishes the ruffed lemurs, both the red-ruffed and the black and white ruffed, from other lemurs is that they are so fluffy. And you can see it pretty well as I'm following them around. They've got a really fluffy coat. They look very big, but I promise you, most of that is fluff, actually. Most of that is not their body. And we've got them moving along here. I'm going to follow behind. We're finally back out in the woods. And so ruffed lemurs have a very thick coat, and that is because they're adapted to the rainforest. So they have that thick coat to basically act like a raincoat and kind of keep the water rolling off of their back so they don't get soaked and they don't get cold when it gets dark outside and there's no more sunlight. There we go. We're back with her in the woods. They also have a very fruit-heavy diet, so they eat a lot of fruit in the wild, and they have a very short digestive tract, meaning that they eat a lot of fruit and they expel it out the other side in their feces very quickly. So ruffed lemurs eat a lot and poop a lot, and that's an important part of their job in the rainforest because they are what's called seed dispersers. So they are going to eat a whole bunch of fruit, they're going to swallow the seeds whole, and then they're going to poop out those seeds all around the forest so that more of those fruit trees can grow. So they've got a very important job. It just happens to be very easy, just eating and pooping all day.
Excellent. So we'll just go back to Mr. Burns' class if you have any more questions.
Okay, hi, I got a student coming over here. Sophie, go ahead.
What do they eat?
So I'm not sure if it's my connection or not, but I didn't get that question.
Oh, sure. I'll just put.
Sophie was just asking what they eat.
Oh, yes. Great question. So this specific lemur is going to eat lots and lots of fruit in the wild, but if you were watching earlier when I showed you what they were eating here, there was a lot more vegetables in their diet. So again, it depends. Are they living somewhere like the Lemur Center in North America, or are they living in the wild in Madagascar? So these lemurs eat lots of fruit in Madagascar. Here, we're going to give them more vegetables instead of a whole bunch of fruit, because the fruit we have here in the US and in most of the developed world is very sugary. We have bred our fruit to be full of sugar and not very full of fiber. And these lemurs need fruit that has a lot more fiber and a bit less sugar. So they're going to get that from eating mostly vegetables in their diet and then a smaller amount of our very sugary fruit. They also get chunks of primate chow. So that is a specially formulated nugget of food that kind of looks like just a large brown nugget of dog food, but it's got all the nutrients that a lemur needs, especially lemurs like them. So it's going to have a bit more sugar, a bit higher in the carb department and a bit lower in fiber. If we had a lemur out here who ate more leaves, you would see more fiber in their diet and a little less of the sugar and carbs. And speaking of, I think we have our other species nearby. pardon the image quality as I move, but I think I can get you to see another species as we answer more questions.
Sure, that'd be great. So we'll just move on to Mr. Bacchus's class if you have any questions.
Adele has a question.
Where do they go in the winter?
Great question and good timing because I am actually right next to the building right now. So all of our forests, well, all but one, are attached to a building so that the lemurs can come in and out. And part of the reason we did that practice this morning where the red-ruffed lemurs got their food out in that smaller space in the woods is so that once we hit our cooler weather very soon here in North Carolina, these lemurs will be used to going inside smaller areas like that building right down there. And if I crouch down, you can see they don't mind it at all. In fact, they're hanging out on the bridge leading to it. And so they will have that door open and we'll lead them back in with lots of their favorite foods, especially bananas for our red-ruffed lemurs. They love bananas. And we will have them go back into that building and eat their favorite treats and stay inside when it's too cold for them. And that building has indoor and outdoor spaces that are smaller and easier to manage. And it's got nice heated areas. And what we do is we bring in branches from the woods. We bring in lots of different things, like we make hammocks out of fire hose. We make all kinds of fun enrichment and things to climb on so that they don't get bored while they stay nice and warm in the winter. And right before we take our next question, I'm going to introduce you to our other species out here. We have our cockerel shafak. These are a pretty fantastic lemur species that most people don't get to see. Cockerel shafak are from northwestern Madagascar. You're seeing some beautiful foraging behavior by Furia right there. So she is our dominant female in this pair. And then we've also got Thrax hanging out a little further back on the branch back there. So this is Furia and Thrax. And Furia is just doing some foraging on some fresh leaves on that tree branch there. And usually you're going to see cockerel shafak moving through the trees in a very unique way. They do what's called vertical leaping and clinging. So when she's moving through the trees, she's actually going to be upright with her shoulders above her hips like we move, and moving bipedally, meaning two-footed. Bi meaning two, pedal meaning foot. And so she's going to move two-footed, but she's going to leap between trees, which means when she's on the ground, she's more comfortable leaping sideways. So they get the nickname the dancing lemur. But of course, right now you're seeing some fabulous foraging behavior because she is hanging upside down so she can reach the freshest, newest growth of those leaves on that tree. So I will pause again to see if we have more questions while we watch beautiful Furia work on her leaves.
Sure, we'll go to Mrs. Tubner's class if you have any questions.
What's the most common type of lemur in the U.S. and what sound do lemurs make?
Excellent question. So the most common type of lemur in the U.S. is the most common type of lemur, I think, in most of the world outside of Madagascar, and that would be the ring-tailed lemur. And we actually don't have those in our forest today, which I kind of love. I kind of love that you don't get to see that lemur and you get to see these really special ones. Ring-tailed lemurs have the small gray bodies, really striking black lined eyes, and then they have, of course, the black and white stripes on their tail. And I think the reason you see so many of them is they're from that spiny forest, spiny desert habitat. So living in a zoo is a little bit easier for them than, say, these shafak right here. They're really hard to take care of. In fact, a lot of zoos actually turn us down when we ask them if they'd like to bring in cockerel shafak because they're just so high maintenance and difficult to take care of. And then I know you had a second question, and it is escaping my mind right now. Nick, can you help me remember?
Ooh, I might just put Mrs. Tubner's class on again.
What sound do lemurs make?
Yes, thank you so much for reminding me. So yes, that depends quite a bit on the type of lemur. So if a lemur is a red-ruffed lemur, like the fuzzy ones we were watching earlier, they're going to make a very, very loud alarm call that kind of sounds like a mixture of loud grunting and shrieking really high pitch. And it's loud and obnoxious because the whole point is to warn somebody if you see a threat or a predator nearby. If you're a shafak, like this animal, your alarm calls kind of sounds like a goose honk, to be honest with you. Still loud, but not quite as loud, not quite as high pitched. My favorite noise that lemurs make is a noise these cockerel shafak right here make. There's a noise called a contact call, which is basically a lemur's way of saying, hey, is everybody still here? I think I lost my family while we were out foraging. And so for the shafak, that's actually how they get their name. Shafak is from the Malagasy people of Madagascar who heard these lemurs making a sound like shufuf, shufuf. And so that sound to them sounded like shafaka, shafaka. And that sound is basically their way of saying, hey, is everybody nearby? Have I lost anybody? And they can check back in and find their family that way.
Excellent. So we'll head to just some YouTube questions before we go to Mr. Ramey's class, because we've got quite a few. This is one from Sarah, who's asking, what do they do with their tails? Why are they so long?
Excellent question. So, of course, the tails are beautiful, but they got to serve a purpose. So the tails are there to help them balance. These lemurs spend a lot of time up in the trees, sometimes balancing in precarious positions, as you saw Furia doing. And so that tail is an extra balancing aid for them, kind of like how cats use it when they are moving around in trees or even running and making fast turns, especially for an animal like a shafak, who when they move through the trees, they can do a solid 20-foot leap easily between trees and land on the next tree over. That 20-foot leap, they got to stay upright that whole time. They got to move so that they stay upright in the air, and that tail can help them balance. Even as she's moving now and adjusting, you can kind of see her tail moving around. They also, oh, I'm so glad he did it right when we were here. Shafak have this adorable habit when their tail is kind of not being used of curling it up like that. So it looks like a little cinnamon bun. So that's just his way of keeping it up and out of the way as he's deciding to nap after eating. And we also have another beautiful lemur behavior right here in the tree, hoping we can see her through the trees. One of our redruffed lemur twins has joined us and is doing a little bit of sun worshiping. So she is sitting, he is sitting as close as he can to that tree trunk and kind of leaning back so he can get some sun on his belly and on his chest, because it's been a chilly morning here and they're loving the hot weather.
Excellent. Just another YouTube question, if that's okay, Megan. Just from Mary, she's asking, where are they found in the wild? Only Madagascar?
Yep, that is the only place you're going to find these lemurs in the wild. There is one little set of islands not far from Madagascar called the Comoros Islands, where mongoose lemurs were introduced, but that is not their native habitat. We've also got some excellent sunbathing down here. I'm going to move us down here for a moment. Let's see. Oh, sunbathing had to pause because there was a squabble between the twins. There we go. Now we've got a little bit of wrestling happening, which is very, very normal. These guys communicate a lot through those little squeaks you heard, and also they like to use their hands to kind of get each other's attention. So that little slapping you saw is very, very normal between redruffed lemurs. So yes, lemurs are only found in Madagascar, nowhere else in the world, which is another reason that our conservation efforts and those of many other organizations, many Malagasy people and organizations, are so, so important to protect them.
Excellent. And we'll just head to just Mr. Ramey's class, just for any final questions.
What type of species do you have in your containment thing?
Sure. So we have 12 different species. So I'll do my best to name them all right now, but I may miss somebody. So I do want to mention that website link that you saw earlier is a great resource. If you search Duke and Lemur, you also can find us. We've got every species listed on our website. We've got lots of information. We've even got a whole set of free virtual tour videos that are separated by species, so you can learn even more, see even more. And so we have red-ruffed lemurs, black and white ruffed lemurs, gray mouse lemurs, fat-tailed dwarf lemurs, eye-eyes, cockerel shafak, mongoose lemurs, crowned lemurs, collared lemurs, red-fronted lemurs, ring-tailed lemurs, and I'm missing somebody, blue-eyed black lemurs, and I've run out of steam, but there's a whole lot of them here, 12 different species, including a species of bush baby. We also have bush babies here.
There's just another YouTube question. I'll just put this on, just from Sonia. She's just asking, what do lemurs like to do in their free time?
Excellent question, and you've kind of seen a lot of it now. So you saw them eat breakfast, and then the rest of the day out in the woods is up to these lemurs, what they want to do. So there's a little bit of kind of finding a spot in the sun. You can see we've come up a little closer, so we have a spot in the sun here. May take a nap, may decide to wrestle with our family a little bit more, may forage for a bit more food. But they spend their day pretty much alternating between napping, socializing, and eating. It's not that busy of a schedule, but it works for them.
Wonderful. Megan, I'll just hand it back to you just to deliver any last messages or final thoughts before we end.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. I know we are planning on doing a couple more of these broadcasts with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants before the end of our free-ranging warm season here at the Lemur Center. And then after that, we're going to do even more behind the scenes with other things we do here at the Lemur Center with our fossil collection that we didn't even mention, or all the research behind the scenes. So thank you so much for joining us, but be sure to stay tuned with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants and check us out. We have social media accounts, we have our website. There's lots and lots more information. We kind of just barely scratched the surface today, but thank you for learning and caring about lemurs with us.
Cool. And if anyone has any more questions, just feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll be able to get the answers back to you just after this broadcast is finished. Cool. So I'll just bring everyone back in just to say a final goodbye. All right, thank you.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.